Welcome to Medical Spanish for Nurses, Español Médico para Enfermeros. Let's get started by talking about some of the basics in Spanish. First of all, let's look at the Spanish alphabet. You'll notice that it's actually very similar to the English alphabet with the exception of 4 letters, and these are CH, which is che, double L, which is ella, the N with the little squiggly line over the top, which is ñ, and the double R, which is R. This is the rolled R in Spanish that a lot of English speakers are worried about. My recommendation is don't worry about this too much. The other thing that's really important to understand about Spanish is that the pronunciation is very consistent and it is a phonetic language. Let's go through the pronunciations of some letters in Spanish. A makes the A sound, as in papa. E makes the E sound, as in elefante. And notice that all 3 of those E's are pronounced the exact same way. H's in Spanish are always silent, as in hola, except after the C in che. I's are pronounced like E, as in vivir. J's are pronounced very similar to the English H sound, as in empujar. The double L is pronounced with the Y sound, as in llave, and the ñ has the ñ sound, as in jalapeno. It might also be helpful to mention that R's in Spanish are pronounced a little bit differently than R's in English. If you look at the words run or fear, the R sound comes from the back of the throat, whereas the R sound in Spanish is more similar to the D sound in English. So it's made by touching the tip of the tongue to the roof of the mouth. So, for example, the word vivir, it's not vivir, it's vivir. And this might help you with some pronunciation in Spanish. There's also the letter U with 2 dots over the top, which is relatively rare, but I think it's important to mention. This is used to change the pronunciation of the letter U, and you'll almost always see it after the letter G. An example of this is the word Miguel, where the U is silent, and the word vergüenza, which the U is pronounced more of like a W sound when it has the 2 dots over the top. Let's talk about accents. Accents are applied over vowels to change the emphasis to a different syllable. By default, the accent will be almost always over the second to last syllable. So let's look at a couple examples of this. The word esta, which means this, and the word está, which means it is. Another example is cámara, which means camera, and delicioso. And if you'll notice, delicioso does not have an accent because the first O, which is where the natural accent falls, is the second to last syllable. Next, let's talk about the concept of masculine and feminine words in Spanish. Words, pretty much all nouns in Spanish, are assigned a gender. There's various reasons for specific genders in certain words. For example, words like mama or hermano correspond to a gender of a specific person, but generally they're just pretty random, and unfortunately you'll just have to memorize them. There's a couple different ways to say the in Spanish. The masculine form is el, which is singular, or los, which is plural. and la, which is singular, or las, which is plural. Adjectives will end in an O or an A based on the gender of that word. Words describing yourself or someone else will end in the gender of the subject. And let's go through a couple examples of that. First of all, estoy contenta. I'm a female. I am the subject. So contenta has a feminine ending. Another example of a feminine word is la casa está fría. The house is cold. The subject of that sentence is the house, which is feminine, and so fría, which is the adjective describing the house, is also feminine. And the last example would be a plural masculine example, which is los perros traviesos, which means the mischievous dogs. The subject of that sentence is the dogs. The dogs are plural and masculine, and so travieso becomes traviesos. The next thing we need to talk about are the two different ways to say you in Spanish. Tú and usted. Tú is the common form of you, and you would use that when speaking to young people, to your friends, to common people. Usted is the more formal or respectful form of you, and you would use that when you're talking to the elderly, people in positions of power, authority, things like that. The phrases that we're going to use today are going to be in the tú form, and that is the form that I would stick to as a beginner, just to avoid any confusion. This is a cute little graphic that I have stumbled upon, and I think it does a beautiful job of illustrating the difference between tú and usted. Tupac is hanging out with his friends, and usted Pac is ready for business. Verbs in Spanish are a super broad topic that could honestly take up several lessons just because of how much there is to cover, and really you don't need to know this if you have no intention of actually learning Spanish, but you just want to learn some basic words and phrases for everyday use in the medical field, and we'll get into that next. I just wanted to briefly touch on this topic because I do think it's important to understand a little bit of. Verbs in Spanish are super easy to identify because they will always end in AR, ER, or IR. And you can see here this table in the present tense that shows the conjugations for AR, ER, and IR verbs. You can actually see why you would want to stick to the tú form, because usted could get a little bit confusing since the verbs are conjugated the same as he or she, which is él or ella on this table. And a fun little fact, the example at the bottom that says yo hablo español e inglés, this means I speak Spanish and English, but I want you to notice the E that is being used in place of the Y to mean and you will see this E instead of a Y anytime that it is followed by a word that starts with I. So it would be español y inglés, but grammatically it is correct to say español e inglés. Okay, now let's get into some parts of the body. First, we're going to talk about the face and head. This is just a quick little overview of the list that we're going to be going through. These slides are in case you'd like to take a screenshot or have just a quick little reference list of all the words that we're going to talk about. The face and head. The face is la cara and head is la cabeza. The eyes are los ojos, and in this case they are ojos azules, which is blue eyes. La boca is the mouth. La nariz is the nose, and if you'll notice, this sounds very similar to nares in English. And el oído is the ear. Another way to say this is la oreja. Now looking at the mouth, los labios are the lips. Los dientes are the teeth. And if you'll notice, that is actually very similar to dental in English. And la lengua is the tongue. And if you are a fan of Mexican food, you probably already know what lengua is because it is cow tongue in Mexican cuisine. Next, we'll talk about the extremities, and we'll go into these in a little bit more detail. El hombro is the shoulder. El brazo is the arm. La mano is the hand. And if you'll notice, even though mano ends in an O, and you would think it's a masculine word, it's actually feminine. So it is la mano. And the way to say fingers is los dedos. Legs are las piernas. The knee is la rodilla. The foot is el pie. And notice it looks like pie in English, but it's not. It's pie. And los dedos de los pies are the toes. And the direct translation of toes in Spanish are fingers of the feet. Los dedos de los pies. Now let's go through some of the major organs. El cerebro is the brain, which is very similar to the word cerebral in English. El corazón is the heart, and los pulmones are the lungs. And if you'll notice, this is very similar to the word pulmonary in English. Los pulmones is pluralized because there are two lungs, but if you were referring to just one lung, it would be el pulmón. El estómago is the stomach. El hígado is the liver. La vesícula is the gallbladder. And el páncreas is the pancreas. Los intestinos are the intestines. El apéndice is the appendix. And los riñones are the kidneys. One singular kidney would be el riñón. El cuello is the neck. El pecho is the chest. So chest pain is dolor del pecho. Dolor means pain. La garganta is the throat. And la espalda is the back. El hueso is bone. La sangre is blood. Las arterias are arteries. And las venas are veins. Next, let's talk about some common words that you'll see regarding the hospital and medical care. El hospital is the hospital. La enfermera is the nurse, and this is a female nurse. A male nurse would be el enfermero. El cirujano is the surgeon, and this could also be made feminine for a female surgeon. It would be la cirujana. And the last one is la doctora. This is referring to a female doctor, and it would be el doctor for a male doctor. You may also hear a doctor referred to as el médico. let's talk about vital signs. Vital signs are los signos vitales. Blood pressure is la presión, and it can be alta, which is high, or baja, which is low. And these would be la presión alta for high blood pressure, or la presión baja for low blood pressure. Heart rate is el pulso. Cardiac rhythm is el ritmo cardíaco. Respirations are las respiraciones. Temperature is la temperatura. And fever is la fiebre. Now let's talk about some common words in the hospital room and bed. Bed is la cama. You may hear camilla, but it is more referring to like a gurney or a stretcher. The head of the bed is la cabecera, and sábanas are sheets. So you may hear sábanas sucias, which are dirty linens, or sábanas limpias, which are clean linens. So again, la cama is the bed, la silla is the chair, la silla de ruedas is the wheelchair, and ruedas are wheels, so it literally is the chair of wheels. La almohada is the pillow. La cobija is the blanket. And el baño is the bathroom. Next, let's talk about a couple of common verbs. Turn over, like kind of roll over in the bed, is voltear. Reposition is reposicionar. And then let's skip down to the bottom of the list because we'll go over some of these other ones in more detail in just a minute. Orinar is urinate or go pee. And hacer del baño is go to the bathroom. Sentarse means to sit, and this is actually a great example of a reflexive verb, which is a kind of complicated topic, but it is a specific type of verb that refers back to the subject. In this case, it would be perfectly fine to just say sentar, which would make plenty of sense still and is not technically incorrect to say. Caminar means to walk. Dormir means to sleep. Comer is to eat. And beber or tomar is to drink. And you could say beber or tomar agua, which would be to drink water. The sides of the body are los lados, and one side is el lado. The left side is izquierdo, and this can change to be feminine, which would be izquierda. The right side is derecho, and this can also change to the feminine form derecha. Some examples of this are el brazo izquierdo, which is the left arm, and la rodilla derecha, which is the right knee. And in this picture here, you can see los lados del cerebro, which are the sides of the brain. On the left is el lado izquierdo, and on the right is el lado derecho. Next, we'll talk about some words relating to medications. A couple I'll point out here are la dosis, which is the dose, and la vacuna, which is the vaccine. Las pastillas are pills. Los medicamentos are medications. La inyección is the injection. Los antibióticos are antibiotics. And el suero is IV fluid. La glucemia is blood glucose. You could also use the word azúcar, which means sugar, if that's easier to say, although it's really more referring to like sugar, like saying this food is high in sugar kind of thing, or I'm gonna add sugar to this thing. But saying azúcar definitely also gets the message across. La comida is food. La alimentación is nutrition, or you could use it with like a tube feeding kind of a situation. Análisis de sangre is blood work. You could also say pruebas de sangre, which is like blood tests. And los rayos X are x-rays. And X is literally X in Spanish. Next, we'll talk about some common words relating to the topic of respiratory. Respirar means to breathe. It is the verb. El oxígeno is oxygen. La flema is phlegm or sputum. El ventilador is the ventilator. And dificultad respirando is difficulty breathing. To say shortness of breath, you could say falta de aliento, which aliento means breath and falta means like lacking, or you could say te falta el aire, which means like lacking the air, lacking the breath. La tos is cough. El inhalador is an inhaler. El coágulo de sangre is a blood clot. El coágulo is a clot, which is a lot like the sound of the word coagulate or coagulation. And sangre, as we learned earlier, means blood. Succionar is the verb for to suction. And el terapeuta respiratorio is a respiratory therapist. Now we'll go over some basic assessment words. As we talked about earlier, pain is el dolor. Allergies are las alergias. Dizzy is mareado or mareada. Palpitations are las palpitaciones. Anxiety is la ansiedad. And nausea is náuseas. And you would use this in a sentence like tienes náuseas, which means basically, do you have nausea? And a couple more basic assessment words. Las dentaduras are dentures. Los anteojos are glasses, which literally means before the eyes. And there's actually a couple ways you can say glasses in Spanish. Los lentes or las gafas are also a couple of ways to say glasses. El marcapasos is the pacemaker. El bastón is the cane. And la andadera is the walker. Now let's get into a couple of common phrases that you might need for your everyday practice. To say that you are their nurse, you would say soy tu enfermero or soy tu enfermera. And obviously, as we talked about before, the ending of that word depends on your gender. To say that he or she is your doctor, it would be él es tu doctor if the doctor is a male, or ella es tu doctora if the doctor is a female. Next, to say your name, you would say me llamo. That means my name is, and of course you would add your name at the end of that sentence. To ask for somebody's name, it would be ¿Cómo te llamas? And that means what is your name? This is actually a great example of a reflexive verb in action. And if you remember that verb conjugation chart that we talked about way early on, llamarse is conjugated to the yo form, llamo, and the se converts to me because the verb is referring back to itself, back to the subject. So, me llamo. And in the ¿Cómo te llamas? It is in the tú form. And so, llamar, which is the root of the verb llamarse, becomes llamas, which is the tú form. And the se becomes te because it is also in the tú form. I would also like to point out here that the verb llamar actually means to call. So when you ask someone ¿Cómo te llamas?, you're actually asking them how do you call yourself. The next one is ¿Sabes dónde estás? And that means do you know where you are? And the answer to this question would be ¿Estás en el hospital?, which means you are in the hospital. ¿Qué año es? Means what year is it? ¿Tienes dolor? Means do you have pain? And ¿dónde? Means where. Apriétame las manos means squeeze my hands. Saca la lengua is stick out your tongue. No dobles el brazo is don't bend your arm. Necesitas hacer del baño means do you need to go to the bathroom. And tienes calor means are you hot. And tienes frío means are you cold. Another fun fact about Spanish is that you always ask someone if they are hot by saying tienes calor and never estás caliente, because this actually means are you horny. Voltéate al lado izquierdo or voltéate al lado derecho, and that means turn to the left side or turn to the right side. ¿Te quieres reposicionar? Do you want to be repositioned? Te voy a limpiar means I am going to clean you up, and te vamos a limpiar means we are going to clean you up. Te voy a dar las pastillas is I'm going to give you the pills, and te voy a dar la medicina is I am going to give you the medicine. Te voy a revisar la piel is I am going to check your skin. Te vamos a revisar la piel is we are going to check your skin. Quédate en la cama, which all nurses know how to say, means stay in the bed. And no hagas eso means don't do that. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and I hope it has taught you something that will be useful to you in your everyday practice. Good luck!